Well, it certainly is an honor to be here with all of you tonight. I do appreciate the opportunity, Pastor John, for letting me come. You'll have to forgive me if I have to bring my mom up to finish the sermon because I'm homeschooled and I can't finish most things by myself. We'll see if I make it all the way through tonight. All right, so our passage tonight is going to be in Hebrews chapter 12, if you would like to turn there. Hebrews chapter 12. Well, Pastor John, I believe we might could agree on there are two convictions from which a fellow might preach a sermon. Now I know that God gives us a sermon that we have, and He shows us the passage, and that's what we preach from, the unction from God. But the conviction from which we preach the sermon. There's two different kinds. We preach from expertise. The late Dr. Chuck Missler, God had gifted him in the area of mathematics and apologetics. So that is proving that God is real, proving the Bible is true, epistemology, what is truth, all of that. And so all of his sermons were preached with that idea in mind. And that's how God had blessed them. And then there's other ways that you might would preach. You might would preach from desperation. You might would preach because you see a dearth in an area, and you wish to enlighten some people to that. And I think that's probably where I'm preaching this message from, is from a conviction of what I've seen, the shortcomings I've had in my own life, and my own struggle to get over those. I spent quite a time considering what I was going to preach. Went back and forth on a lot of things, and then eventually, this is what I decided on. All right, now I have a question for all of you. Whether it be... Yes. Am I? There we go. All right. So anyway, I have a question for you. How many of you, whether it be a relative or you work at a daycare or in any capacity, you have spent a lot of time around babies or very young children?
Sure.
Okay, a couple of you. So my sister babysat for probably close to 2 years. It was an 8-month-old and a 3-year-old. And they were there most days of the week. So I've spent a lot of time around babies. And you learn two things about children when you spend enough time with them. First off, you learn that they are very evil sometimes. But also you learn they, as a general rule, are not smart. They are not smart. You can't expect your child to be composing sonnets or to be properly implementing the Pythagorean theorem. You can't fry up a ribeye and toss it over to your kid and have them go, well, thank you very much, and dig in. It's not going to happen. Kids are not intelligent, little kids. As they get older, then they mature. Then they're ready for those cereals that, for some reason, are always branded with an uncomfortably close shot of a baby's face on the bottle. And then they can go on to bananas. I knew one lady that would chew up her kids' food and then take it out of her mouth and put it in their mouths so they could then have real food.
Yeah.
But as kids get older, then they begin to be more ready for the better foods. And it's much the same way with Christians. When a Christian first becomes a Christian, when they're first converted, then you don't expect them to be the master of Bible trivia. You don't expect them to be ahead of everyone else. And that's okay. Because everybody has to start from somewhere so they can get somewhere else. But the problem that I see a lot of the time is a lot of people find that it's okay to stay at the same place that they start.
Come on, man. Sure.
And they think that as long as they've got salvation, then that's all they need. And therefore they become discontent in their life. Anxiety arises, stress arises because nothing is right, because you're a Christian who's not living like Christ. And so tonight, because we're in Hebrews chapter 12, I want to read this passage real quick. Wherefore, seeing we also are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, Let us lay aside every weight and the sin which does so easily beset us, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of God. There's a phrase that appears several times in the Bible. It is the phrase, walk worthy. Ephesians 4:1, I therefore, the prisoner of the Lord, beseech you that you walk worthy according to the vocation wherewith you're called. 1 Thessalonians 2:12, that you would walk worthy of God who hath called you unto his kingdom and glory. So the phrase walk worthy has this idea of when you are walking, the way that you carry yourself, the things that you say, the things that you do, they need to be held to a certain standard. And in this case, that standard is Christ himself. Be ye holy as I am holy. And that's the instruction that we find as Christians is given to all of us. And that's the standard that we are called to meet. So with that in mind, there are two primary inhibitors for a Christian that is desiring to walk worthy. Two things that can get in the way. And the first of those would certainly be comparison. A lot of Christians can find themselves getting very discouraged because they're comparing themselves with other people and they find that they don't stack up. Any teacher worth his salt is going to tell you people learn differently. Anybody who's worked with kids will tell you that. I've worked with kids trying to memorize verses. All kids have a different way of how they like to memorize verses. Some kids need to make the verses a song. Then they'll sing it to themselves and then they'll memorize it. Some kids have to repeat the verse hundreds of times and then they've got it. Some kids need you to give them every other word and then they can quote the verse just fine. And then other kids, over-accomplished homeschoolers, just already have the verse memorized, so they don't even need to read it in the first place. And so everybody learns differently. So one of the biggest, most discouraging things that you can do is you can look at someone else and say that they are in a different place than I am in, and therefore I need to strive to be in that place. But because everyone learns differently, the only logical thing that we can do is we can only compete with ourselves. We can look at where we were yesterday, we can look at where we're at today, we can look at how far we've come, and then we can look at how we can do the same to go that same distance tomorrow, if not farther. It's all about where we stand. Some people have the capacity to read 20 chapters a day and remember everything that they read. I don't have that capacity. If I read 20 chapters a day, I would probably forget almost everything that I read.
Yeah, sure.
So you have to find the plan that is challenging for yourself, but it works, and it's something that is going to help you continue to improve, and you're not just being lazy about it.
Yeah.
But then there's also another aspect to comparing yourself to other people. There's the aspect of if you are one of the people who was raised in a good home, you have a good upbringing, you have a solid foundation, and then you find that you're ahead of most people, so you start comparing yourself to the people that are below you. You set your standards to their standards, and you find yourself okay with something that for you, not for them, but for you is mediocrity. And then that is another danger. That is the exact same problem, and it is just as deadly to someone who's ahead of everyone else to think it's okay to stop just because they're ahead of everyone else. But our goal is to be like Christ. And if we really get that in our minds, then we realize that there is no sense in comparing ourselves to anyone else who is not Christ. A perfect person is just going to be striving for imperfection, which is by definition foolish. The second problem that arises is inconsistency. If with your brain, your muscles, and even your spirit, if you do not use them regularly enough, then they will atrophy. If you sit on a couch for 3 weeks, if you're a runner, you will find you can't run as far. If you're a weightlifter and you sit on the couch for 3 weeks, you will find you can't lift as much weight.
Right.
If you regularly use your mind and then you spend 3 weeks watching YouTube or TikTok, you can't think clearly. All of your words are going to be garbled. That's just how it works. And with your spirit, if you aren't consistently refreshing yourself with the scripture and in time spent with prayer, in prayer with God, then that's going to atrophy your spirit, and you're not going to be improving. So consistency is key. If you are off, if you're on one day and you're off another, then that's not Christian living. You can't say that you're a good baseball player because you hit one good hit and the rest of the game you did horribly. It's all about consistency. So consistency and comparison are the two biggest enemies of walking worthily. But it would be rather pointless just to discuss what the biggest inhibitors to walking worthily are if I don't talk about how you walk worthily. So the first thing, of course, and I really liked what Brother Easton said about salvation. That is, salvation is far and away the first thing. If you don't have that right, if you aren't saved, then nothing is going to stack up. On top of that, salvation is the most important day in the life of anyone. It is the most important thing that can ever happen to you. It's absolutely incredible. It's life-changing. It's eternity-changing. Every sinner that repents and gets saved is another person that's going to be in heaven. So salvation is very important. But there's another aspect to salvation that I find a lot of people struggle with. A lot of people aren't sure that they're saved. And that's something that's really, really tricky to deal with, because these people get it in their heads that they aren't saved. And so you see rededications and rebaptisms, which I'm not saying anything negatively about. But I think that the core problem, from what I can tell from the people that I've talked to, I have a good friend of mine who struggles a lot with assurance of his salvation. And I find that the problem with him is that he's living like the world. And he's living wickedly, and yet he's a Christian. And then he decides that he is unhappy with his salvation, and therefore he doesn't feel like he's saved anymore. And so it's very important that you live like Christ, because if you don't, then you're going to start doubting your salvation. That is the root of doubting your salvation, is when you're living in sin. Of course, if you're not following Christ, you're not going to feel like you're following Christ. Okay, so the next thing after salvation is spotlessness. And I don't mean perfection. I mean spotlessness of the mind. Proverbs tells us that we should keep our heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life. It is so very important to keep a pure mind, because there was a fellow that said that we live, our actions, we live as we think. So the thing that we spend the most of our time thinking about, what we let our heart love, what we let our heart spend time pondering, is what we're going to do. Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaketh, Jesus told the Pharisees. And it was interesting, because he told them that in the context of the Pharisees accusing his disciples because they were eating with unwashed hands. And so he explained to them, it's not what enters into a man that defileth him, but what comes out of a man that defileth him. Because out of the heart proceed, and he gives a long list. It's also when he's going through a portion of the Ten Commandments, and he's saying, and I'm paraphrasing here, when he says murder is not the act of murdering someone, it's once you murder them in your heart, then you've already murdered them. It doesn't matter if you actually go through with the action. It's all about the posture of our heart. That is the key there. And so the third thing, of course, is going to be studying, because if you don't study the scriptures, then you can't have a proper understanding of God. Studying the scriptures is what gives us freedom from temptation. Thy word have I hid in my heart, that I might not sin against thee. It's what gives us comfort, that will keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee. And great peace have they which love thy law, and nothing shall offend them. So all of these answers to all of these problems that a Christian would run into is found in studying. But the problem is, people think that if you aren't reading a certain number of chapters a day, then you're not a good Christian. And you can only be a good Christian by reading that certain number of chapters a day. But it's such a fallacy of thinking, because the truth is, I would say that if you don't have the relationship with God, and you don't have the desire to serve him, then it's going to be mostly fruitless when you read the scriptures, and you're going to find it absolutely impossible to stay consistent with anything until you've gotten that foundation, the relationship. So studying relies on spotlessness of the mind. And we cannot have proper studying, consistent studying. Everything else is hinged on where our mind is focused. And it's horribly sad to watch all of the people that just live in this passive Christianity, that are willing to stop at salvation, because there is no stopping point in Christianity. There is no rest stop. There is no destination until heaven. There's no destination on this earth, and there's no time in which it's okay to let down your guard, because the devil is a roaring lion and he is walking about seeking whom he may devour. Right. It happens constantly, every day. He's getting more and more and more people. And the only way that we can keep that from happening to us is if our mind is stayed on him and we're spending consistent time in study. And so that's really the gist of walking worthily. It's founded on the posture of our heart and in what we choose to spend our time doing and choose to spend our time thinking on. It's built up by the time that we spent in study, and then finally we can go into all the world and preach the gospel, because it would be foolish for someone to spend no time building their car and then go drive it on the highway. You have to get the vehicle right first. Once the vehicle is reliable and you've built it to the proper place, then you can take the vehicle and you can work with it. If you don't mind, I will close in a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you for this wonderful day that you blessed us with, Father, and I thank you for this wonderful opportunity that we've had to come before you, Father, and enjoy this time of fellowship with each other. I thank you for Brother Easton and what a wonderful, wonderful message that he brought. And I pray that you would just bless the remainder of this evening. Give us ears to hear and help us to be attentive. In your Son's name, amen.